whatever is that?
Yeah, and then just those are red.
Yeah. Isn't that what it just was, right?
Okay.
I don't touch any of these.
I lied to you. So on red that, then you're gonna have to get camera 1 or 2 again. When you see it like right there.
The way the fob is.
So this doesn't need to be.
It is not.
Oh, because it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be red.
It is not. It's weird.
I feel deceived.
I think I feel confused every single day I come in here. Like I learn a new challenge every day. That's just how it goes.
Like Jacob.
Yeah.
I've been so the cat ran over there into I know I had the first I had to fall. You just did it. You did it.
No. That'd be hilarious. Oh man. There he is. Johnny, our door broke, both of our cars are in the garage. So I got Steve out there, got lift, I got both cars out of the truck. And I said, all right, I'm back in. I need help lower the door. Stay open. Well, I'm sitting, I just pulled the second car out, and I hear, BAM! I thought she was going to lower it by herself, and she did. And I went like this, and then I called her, and she's like, oh, now I understand what you meant by you needed my help.
Yeah. I didn't.
Surprised it didn't break all the windows.
I didn't think about them being so heavy. Of course, that's what the spring is. I thought all of it was straight.
But is it a double help door? Okay, that's right. Mine's a single.
I don't know, 20, 18, 20 foot wide.
You know, I've got just a single door. It's a little bit extra wider than a single door. Real wide.
Conversation stops. Can't top Dave's story. Somebody has a garage door story that.
Tell you about the time I was trapped. Was there for 3 days.
The time I locked myself.
You locked yourself to the steering? No one could steal you.
I had to have help. I'm serious.
Get locked in
And,
get out.
This was back when, back when they were popular and Paul Harvey was at the time. My boss, company, boss, his sales. So I pulled in the bank. It'll expand and push together, and the part that goes up in there is serrated. It's not quite. Long story short, it pinched that part of my thing in it enough where I couldn't get it out. And then it locked. Well, to unlock it, you have to push it just a little bit further. And just doing it. Get this one. I know. Holler in an old lady. Come over and help me pull it off. I grab one end.
That story got real painful. I just thought you were going to get like tangled up in it or something. Lose a finger.
Well, it never had a car show.
You could have been that staff that was in the commercials.
As strange as it is, I was telling that story from the other time. This girl said, "Well, that same thing happened."
All right. That seems like a design flaw.
Just take away from your class.
Yeah, exactly. There's bound to be a connection there. Okay, we'll get started now that we've all envision ourselves losing fingers to car safety enhancements. All right, so you get Scott back next week. I'm sure he'll have exciting stories of his many adventures in foreign lands. So we will kind of continue down some of the same theme we've been talking about here on the road to Emmaus. And so we have this vision.
In connection to their trip, I'm not sure how many see their Facebook posts, pictures they post. They are excellent photographers. They have taken some great pictures.
He's been at home for 3 weeks. Just pulling photos off of Instagram. That looks good. I like that. Who does most of them? Scott does more than Shannon, right? Does she? Okay. That makes you even more jealous. No, it's like
Yeah, and he went scuba diving, and he said it's like being in an aquarium. I'm not sure what kind of camera he used for that. It's a video underwater coral fish.
what body of water was that?
We're off South Africa.
I have a hard time giving him what continent he's on at any given time. So. I don't know what underwater he. All right, so one of the themes that reappears in a number of Old Testament prophecies that then pertain to New Testament prophecies about Jesus returning has to do with Jesus being enveloped in clouds or being on the clouds or something like that. I love the Michelangelo picture of. In Michelangelo's vision of biblical stories, everybody has great abs. Everyone. So we're going to look at this idea of Jesus coming on the clouds. And of course, we have songs like this, "Transported I rise to meet him in clouds of the sky." We hear about this a lot on that bright and cloudless morning when the dead in Christ shall rise. And so it's a theme, it's an image that's pretty prevalent throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, and in hymns and things like that. And what we're going to find is that there's, of course, more to it than just that, right? The clouds provide some continuity in how God is described throughout the entirety of the Bible, and it provides some continuity in how prophecy happens. So, prophecy of Old Testament prophecy, and the prophecy of Jesus coming back. So, in Hebrew, a cloud means a cloud. So there you go. We got that out of the way. Basically, a covering of the sky, because the clouds cover up the sky. So a cloud is a cloud. The definition of cloud is kind of that thing you see up there. All right, so let's think about when we first start to see clouds mentioned. We see them a lot in the Bible. And so we get the story of Noah. Of course, we think of the rainbow, but the rainbow is set in cloud cover up there, which makes sense. That's for rainbow. We see rainbows associated with clouds. And of course, this is a sign of God's covenant. When we think about the story of Exodus, we have a lot of clouds. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire. And so we, again, in a pretty prominent way, see God as a cloud, traveling in a cloud, however we want to think of that. A fire, too. We're going to talk about clouds. We get that cloud imagery a number of times in Exodus. As soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Again, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud. People may hear when I speak with you and may also believe you forever. Again, Moses entered the tent. The pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent. The Lord would speak with Moses. These are all just in Exodus. Elsewhere, the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to Moses. The Lord came down in the pillar of cloud. So at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam. And then here's an interesting one, because this is in the book of Job. So this is one of Job's friends. And we should not take everything that they say to be like correct. But we can see how at the time they were thinking of clouds and God's relationship to clouds. So Eliphaz says, is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. But you say, what does God know? Can he judge through the deep darkness? Thick clouds veil him so that he does not see, and he walks on the vault of heaven. Eliphaz here saying, this is someone saying, assuming God really can't understand what's going on earth because he's so far away. Again, we might not agree with that. But one of the images that he uses there is that thick clouds surround God or conceal God from, in this case, from God being able to see the world. So again, thinking of how the ancient Israelites thought of clouds and God being clouds. He's associated, this is kind of where he is. There's a reason we have all these cartoons where God is always sitting up there on nice little puffy clouds and little fluttering angels nearby. That imagery of God being in the clouds or being associated with clouds is just throughout the Bible. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He came swiftly on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, thick clouds, dark with water. And then we have in the New Testament some pretty important images of God or Jesus in clouds. The Transfiguration, cloud. Lord, it is good that we are here, if you will. I'll make 3 tenths. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. I think in the book of Luke, in the Transfiguration, the cloud actually, they walk into the cloud envelops them. So, the clouds represent in all of these presence of God. They point to glory and splendor. They point to what's behind those clouds. So if God is concealed by the clouds or he's traveling in the clouds, the clouds then come to be associated with God being there. Of course, being blessedly behind the clouds. To see God's presence. Of course, we know that from the burning bush. So God uses clouds when he appears to humans. And humans use clouds as visible reminders of God. Or at least this is what we're going to see in not just what I just read, but these other passages that talk about clouds, right? So this is the idea. It's kind of a two-way street. There's a physical, actual cloud in these cases. God says, he's appearing in a cloud to Aaron and Miriam. Keep trying to Aaron and Miriam. Or Moses or any of these. God is actually appearing in a cloud, right? And using a cloud, to guide the Israelites through the wilderness. The reality of the cloud is there. And then, in turn, what we're going to see is the imagery of clouds in some of these writings. Clouds become associated with God, become reminders of God. Envision God being in the clouds, behind the clouds. That. So it's kind of a two-way street, right? God actually does use them, and they appear. Clouds really appear. And then if God appears to you in a cloud, this is how he works with the Israelites. When you look up and see clouds, lo and behold, you might actually think of God, because he has used these things to talk about the story of Noah. Rainbow is kind of coming from the cloud. It's not like it's not always God's presence, right on earth. And so it's kind of this, I think, two-way thing that becomes important, associating clouds with God. All right, so let's start at the end and kind of work our way backwards. Let's look at some prominent clouds that appear when God's coming in the clouds, when Jesus is coming in the clouds in the New Testament, a number of places in the New Testament. We'll kind of work our way backwards and see where some of that imagery, where some of those ideas, those themes are coming from. So, of course, Revelation, we have a couple from Revelation. Behold, he is coming with the clouds. And every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. So, fairly straightforward. It will come with the clouds. See it again. I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle. He who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. And so we get this at the very end. We're going to see this. So the first time the clouds kind of have this prominent place is there in that covenant with Noah. And at the very end of the Bible, we're getting clouds playing a prominent role in how this is going to happen. Jesus returns. We're seeing cloud imagery. We're seeing God being on a cloud. That seems like it should be significant. Like, why tell us? It's irrelevant. Why I mentioned it numerous times. If it's irrelevant, and if it is relevant, what does it mean? Why clouds? Why does he need to come on a cloud? Without a cloud? Assume. Do whatever he wants. But clouds are. 1 Thessalonians, plenty of good end time stuff. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. We're not just meeting up with God and the people who have already died, who have risen. We're going to meet all of them in the clouds. Again, it's an easy detail to overlook when you think about talking about the resurrection of the dead and things like that. But it's there. That detail continues to be there, as we'll see. Why? So why clouds? What do you think? You're getting a lot of cloud cover.
Apparently, root of that word A-N-A means cloud, cloud, vibrant, act like cloud. They
Okay, so what are the different interpretations? What is this cloud doing? Aliens?
I know, but
Aliens in the clouds?
right.
Well, so why do you think clouds are this primary, or not primary, why are clouds consistently present, or consistently part of God's appearing?
That neat, soft glory that's you can't look on God.
There seems to be. I mean, what do clouds provide if you're out in the middle of the desert or an open field? Shade. Yeah.
That is a halfway point between earth and heaven.
It's going to be a magnificent look. Guys, out. The
Perhaps you got plenty of, like I said, we're really looking at clouds, but even some of the passages that you have looked at, we'll look at. It's not just clouds. There's also earthquakes and thundercloud. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen at different times when God kind of when God's presence is there. In descriptions, return to Jesus. It's not just clouds.
They're talking about maybe related to something like here. The verb appears and then not cloud.
Right. Now,
Yeah, if y'all,
do some.
yeah, if you recall, when we talked about Revelation, at one point an angel appears to John, whose body is cloud. Like, it seems very strange. Picture a little fluffy cotton ball thing right at the end. Angels that actually appears to John is like elemental, features that he has.
Make this word loud.
Yeah.
That everybody can relate to, but nobody really knows what it is. So we use the word cloud.
God, is Jesus coming in that cloud? Yeah, we do. Yeah, and what we do know though is that cloud is not like the actual clouds that that word actually indicates to us. Yeah, very much so. I think we're trying to describe God's presence. Wait. Yes. On the other hand, here we have a pretty seemingly significant passage here in Acts. This is where Jesus leaves earth and goes up to heaven. Because when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand? This is another one of those things I've been talking about. Jesus disappears after he's eating the meal with after the road to Emmaus. We don't get their reaction to him disappearing. We just kind of get what they say to their hearts burn. That here we have two angels here, two men in white robes are standing there. You got to think there might be some, maybe they're startled or something. They said, Men of Galilee. It's like as if there's no reaction to it. So I'm going to start talking. Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. So here we have Jesus in person, and all of a sudden we don't know exactly what this looked like. This is what we know.
So is that inspiration, or is there a prophecy about him coming back the same way? Is that inspiration?
Well, pretty correct. He's going to come in the same way as you saw him go. So when he comes back,
But how did they know that? That was inspiration?
well, the angels are telling them that. These two men stood by them in white robes. Those are angels.
Oh, these are angels, okay.
Yes,
So I guess they would know.
Yes.
What did you say?
Not yes. We're going to get to that. We're starting at the end. I want to see some examples of New Testament writers writing about the return of Jesus and clouds involved in Jesus. We're going to look at a couple of Old Testament things that seem to point to the same. Now, this one I think is thinking out of what exactly the end of all things will look like. We talked some about that last week. We can speculate about that. But this seems that, there's got to be some. If they saw him lifted up and a cloud takes him out of their sight upwards and says he's going to come back the same way you saw him go, you got to think it's can't be completely figurative, right? It seems like, okay, it's going to look something like that. That's how I
There's a
see it.
possibility.
I suppose so. I suppose he just happened to choose a cloudy day for his ascension. And so, yeah, all right. I wanted them to, be able to watch, like when you let go of a balloon, and you just watch it until you can't see it. But Jesus picked a cloudy day, so he just disappears into the cloud, and that's it. Perhaps. But there sure do seem to be a lot of cloudy days when God keeps appearing to people. So yeah, no, this is, I don't know, I find that to be somewhat telling in how the second coming would happen. He's going to come back the same way you saw him go into heaven. Again, this is we have several examples from the Gospels of the same kind of thing. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Book of Mark, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Again, this is everything I'm using is ESV version. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am." And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So there you go, the clouds of heaven. Can't just be those regular clouds. There's the special clouds of heaven. There is one time in the New Testament that the word witnesses. There's one time, so the cloud of witnesses is the one time in the New Testament the cloud is used figuratively in that way to talk about the group of people. In the book of Matthew, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And the high priest said to him, different places, Matthew. Same thing we just read. You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And so all these examples, very direct, these examples of people talking about the second coming. Jesus himself talking about it, and a couple other writers talking about it. Referencing the second coming, and they're talking about his coming in the clouds. Some form or fashion. So what they're writing about, they're using images or actual literal things like in Exodus where God is there as a cloud. So they're referencing ideas that appear in the Old Testament, themes that appear in the Old Testament of God being in the clouds or riding on the clouds or something like that. And so this symbolism, I almost hesitate to use that word because it's not always symbolism. Sometimes it's literal clouds. Maybe it's always literal clouds. But the way we think about it symbolically, the way perhaps in the Old Testament they were thinking of it symbolically, we're going to see consistency from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And that's what's kind of, is that, as we talked about before, prophecy is, one of the important things about prophecy is how it can validate whatever it is that then later happens. We talked a lot about that when we looked at Isaiah 53, that this is what this suffering servant is going to experience, this is what the suffering servant is going to be like, all that kind of stuff. Many generations before it happens, and then when it happens, prophecy was there foretelling it, and that helps to authenticate, in this case, Jesus. Right? People say, oh, that's who the prophets were talking about. How do we know that's who the prophets were talking about? Because everything they said actually happened to Jesus. And so prophecy works in different ways. Well, what we see primarily in prophecy in the Old Testament is prophets saying, Israel, you need to shape up right now, or bad things are going to happen in the near future. Prophecy also works in the long future in order to give some kind of authority and validity to whatever was prophesied. You have Scripture know the scripture comes true. And so that's an important when we think about prophecy in the Old Testament and how that kind of manifested itself with Jesus, prophecy in the Old and New Testament that will then someday manifest itself with the second coming of Christ. And so, once again, this is
Interesting to think all these images, all clouds are useful as not necessarily clothing, shrouds, or camo, or whatever. They are surrounded by the clouds to maybe obscure something.
well, I mean, we know that. Yeah, no, I agree. At the burning bush, I mean, God tells Moses, you can't just let you look at it. That is going to happen. Like the glory of God is too much for you to handle. So yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, in kind of a realistic sense, we need God to shroud His glory from us, or else go blind or be incinerated or whatever happens. Whatever happens when you encounter the glory of God here in this realm where we are right now.
Even on the earth, the atmosphere, and by emphasis cloud, the atmosphere is extremely thin cloud. Clouds are just moisture. It accumulates together before you can actually see it. Without the atmosphere, we would all burn up. It is a protection from the sun's rays. The earth would be like the moon without the atmosphere. Without the cloud.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's a real world. It's strange to think of it as a real world reason is what you're saying. We need the clouds there to protect us from the awesomeness of the glory of God. There's also even ancient Old Testament and before kind of writings. There's the idea of the gods, God, or whatever group of people you're talking about, what they believed. Normally, those beings were up there. We can't get to the sky, mountaintops, stars, things like that. Baal, the god Baal, was very much seen to be a god of thunder and lightning and rain, things like that. And so when God is presented as, being a God who can control thunder and lightning and rain and clouds, I think that's very much the inspired Old Testament writers saying, our God is better than yours. Our God actually controls these things that, for Baal, presume some other ancient gods of the time could not always control. The God can do easily. The God is just part of who God is, part of creation. He can just make things, speaking it into being. Baal, in some of the ancient texts about Baal, he's seen as a god of all these natural things, but he's not necessarily in control of all of it. If that makes sense. And he's then trying to explain nature, things like that, which of course is uncontrollable, right? So we have this God/nature is uncontrollable. We think of the cartoons and movies when we were kids, like the Greek gods, and they each have their own little Neptunes in the water, so you control water. Zeus has thunder and lightning, things like that. They all kind of do their things, which is not exactly how they were thought of at the time. They were more intertwined with those natural elements that they were associated with. So in our way, we have kind of inherited Greek mythology. Neptune, Poseidon, is in lives in the water, and he kind of can control the fish, make waves big if he wants, and things like that. To sacrifice to it or something. And the way they thought of it, it wasn't as much like here's Neptune and he's controlling all that. It's all of that and Neptune are kind of one. They're intertwined. And so with Baal, I'm going to guess that the Greeks did it, and it was already back then probably true for some other. Their gods were far more less removed. It wasn't just like certain elements were like a tool they could use to go get their enemies or something like that. They were just kind of God of it, part of them. They were part of it. And so when nature can't be controlled, it's not just because God doesn't want to control it. Because God, Baal himself, is chaotic, and nature was chaotic. Can't control. So when God is depicted as he always is, as being in complete control of nature, so might be mine. I think that's very much, Old Testament writers using the language of the imagery that the ancient world knew and understood to show that, God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is the one true God, the superior God to all these other gods. Real or not, people believed in. Like, there was one dominant God. One of the ways that in the Old Testament that's revealed is by the fact that God can always so thoroughly control nature. And clouds are nature. So. All right, so let's think about when we were talking about the blessing of Moses. We have this image. Jeshurun is again just a stand-in for Israel. A term that's used a few times to talk about it. None like God, O Jeshurun, arrives through the heavens to your help, to Israel's help, through the skies in his majesty. Daniel, several years ago, this class we did a lot with Daniel. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages to serve him. His dominion and everlasting dominion shall pass away. So here he is, these clouds of heaven. Here he is. And again, it begs the question, God coming to help Israel, riding through the skies, riding on the clouds, or that song. Riding through the skies of his majesty. Here we have the Son of Man coming before God, coming before the Ancient of Days on clouds of heaven. Book of Nahum. Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means clear the guilty. His way is in whirlwind and storm. The clouds are the dust of his feet. Isaiah, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt. Idols of Egypt tremble at his presence. My heart will melt. Okay, so let's think about like the actual idea of clouds in the sky. And if we can try to put ourselves, back several centuries before we had electric lights and satellite imagery of the world and things like that. Think about how clouds actually move in the heavens, in the skies. So think about what we can see of them and how fast storm clouds sometimes move. And these are things we don't even think about. I don't think about this a lot because we don't have to. We're indoors most of the time. But clouds are pretty prominent, right? I don't think I'm assuming too much to think that people who, farmers, people who are outdoors a lot, Probably appreciate that a lot more than someone like, I grew up in a big city and worked inside all day. Probably appreciate things like clouds and just how prominent they are in kind of your daily routine in the ancient world. You're looking at, just checking out the weather, things like that, right? Clouds are a major part of that. The sun, the moon, the stars, the clouds. We don't appreciate that, of course, now because technology and things allowed us to not have to pay attention to those things the way we would. But when you think about some of these images of God riding on a swift cloud, clouds that move fast, I mean, are what's amazing for us to look at, right? But they can also be dangerous, right? When we get on the little radar on our TVs, we watch the clouds moving quickly. That's when it's tornado time, right? It's something that the ancient world certainly was very, very familiar with in a very real way, in a way that we're not. Role that just clouds played. And so that works several different ways for us now when we're looking back on it. One, if God is associated with clouds, which he is, clouds are around a lot, right? There are days with no clouds. Yeah.
To me, it just seems like clouds are a visible verification of presence. Whether it's dust, water vapor, locusts, grasshoppers, you can't see air. We can see something that's in the air. And it's kind of like God. You can't see God. You see the presence of God. It's just a reminder.
Yeah. 4 years desert. You're following. It could have been anything. Could have been a statue. Could have been a bird. I mean, whatever he wanted, right? Just cloud and fire. I think it makes sense. The cloud actually was the cloud big enough to actually provide shade for the Israelites as they wandered through a desert? Makes sense. I mean, it's easy to see the rationale of a fire at night, so you can actually see where you're going, see what's around you. Perhaps the cloud for the Israelites in the day was providing an equally functional role. But I think you're right. Clouds being as prevalent as clouds are, acting as a reminder of God and that God's presence is right there, right? When God appears, a lot of times it's in clouds, behind clouds, it's on the clouds. When you see clouds, right, it's kind of this reminder. I doubt they saw every cloud and thought God's coming or something like that. That doesn't seem get ahead. Doesn't seem realistic. But it would be a reminder that God is there. This representation of the presence of God, of the glory of God. He's continually associated with clouds. So, I mean, that's one of those ways that I think for us looking back helps us maybe to understand a little bit, get in their minds a little bit of how they were seeing God. Makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. And a lot of these, they're describing the nature of God, describing God coming to the aid of ancient Israel, describe God going to destroy his enemies in these forms. And all of these are what we're looking forward to with the second coming, right? God coming to save his people and destroy his enemies. Acts tells us saw him go up in a cloud, he's going to come back. We have the rest of this imagery in the New Testament of clouds being present at the second coming. And what we have in the Old Testament are these examples of God riding around on the clouds and saving his people, destroying the enemies of Israel. Here's one that is going to become relevant to us in the next few weeks. The English Standard Version, sing to God, sing praises to his name, lift up a song to him who rides through the deserts. In like the NIV and the Revised Standard, he's riding on the clouds. Reasons that translators have done it differently. Riding through the desert is going to make sense if we think about those ancient Israelites. Cloud guiding them. This is what we're looking forward to. This is what the ancient Israelites knew. Clouds were there. They keep getting references. Cloud in the Old Testament, and it's God coming to save his people. It's God coming to destroy his enemies. It's the presence of God appearing to people, to give them instruction, to deliver the law, to make covenants with them, like Noah. It's like this just continual symbol of God's interaction with people. I mean, it has symbolic value, but it's an actual literal cloud that God is using in these instances. O kingdoms of the earth, sing to God, sing praises to the Lord, to him who rides in the heavens, the ancient heavens. Behold, he sends out his voice, his mighty voice. Ascribe power to God, whose majesty is over Israel, whose power is in the skies. The imagery we have in the New Testament of the second coming is consistent with the imagery we have in the Old Testament of how God interacts with his people. So it makes sense then for the New Testament writers to write about that. It makes sense for God to use clouds. It is hard for me to picture the second coming of Christ. Get quite a bit of information about it, but it's hard to picture it. But there are some elements I think we can picture. Clouds are certainly part of it. God's using these clouds to interact with his people, to move about the earth for a long time. So again, these clouds are relevant because it's this visible reminder, as you were saying, of God and his glory. It's also very literal. There's a cloud here ostensibly to provide protection from God. We have the symbolic value and the actual role that it's playing in the world. And we're going to have a lot of consistency between the way that God is appearing in the Old Testament and the way that God is saying he's going to appear sometime in the future. And that makes sense. So that God is right here. Here's how he's been coming down to earth. Here's how he's been communicating with his people. Why should he not use the same methods in the future?
You might be coming around to this, but I think all the comparisons in the New Testament where the apostles talking about Jesus coming in the clouds, they're still preaching. They're still preaching Jesus is God.
Okay.
In 1 Thessalonians 4, where you put that up there, at the end of that it says, encourage each other, this message. I think they're still preaching because people still really can't get that through their head that somebody came in flesh and was God. So they're still preaching. So they have to make a comparison with Jesus being in the clouds, like throughout the Old Testament, God was in the clouds.
No, yeah, it makes sense. Like, he's a supernatural, divine being. And who else can be in the clouds except a God or a divine being, a spiritual. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. That's
There's the other idea. Heaven's clear majesty. You see, there's stand. It's on the edge.
none of us can ride on the clouds. We have airplanes, I guess. Maybe we're getting to the point, but we can't appear in the clouds. We can't fly above the earth in the clouds. So yeah, very much a marker, like in Daniel 7, very much a marker of who the Son of Man is. Someone who is divine. Okay, we'll stop there. We went real late last week, so we'll stop there. All right, that's good. Thank you very much. I appreciate all your comments. Scott will be back next week, as I said. So.
Yes, right. What other ladies are they?
Aaron, I think it's Aaron. Oh.
All right.